Welcome back to the live stream for our third session of the afternoon, Teaching Civics Through Open Data and Computer Science with New York City's Department of Education's Computer Science for All and BetaNYC. Our panelists will explore a really interesting question that was in the description, which is, if information technology is one of the greatest powers to manipulate public opinion, how do we build frameworks for the future to be better than today? Our panelists are Brooke from Generation Citizen, Ilana from BetaNYC, Aankit from the New York City Department of Education, and Ramesh from BetaNYC. As a reminder to our attendees, if you'd like to submit questions online, please go to slido.com and use the hashtag NYCSoData, and anyone in the room who wants to submit questions anonymously can do so as well. I'll pass it on to Ilana to kick things off.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Ilana. So thank you to Data and Society for providing live streaming for today's event and this panel. Because it's the afternoon, we're going to keep our remarks short and try to really facilitate a discussion with everybody. So I'm going to have all of us start with a brief introduction about who we are, what the relevant project is that we're working on related to this topic, and why we do the work that we're doing. So,
Hi. I'm Brooke Wallace. I'm the program director with Generation Citizen, which is a national nonprofit, but I'm the program director for here in New York City. Generation Citizen really works on bringing civics into the classroom. We partner with middle and high schools to implement action civics throughout a semester. And so what action civics it's an exciting pedagogy where students are leading their education and doing project-based learning on community issues they really care about. So through this experience, they're talking about community issues and thinking about making systemic long-term change in their community by choosing a policy goal and interacting with local government. Through that, they're enhancing their civic knowledge, skills, and most importantly, dispositions so that they are advocates for their entire life. The open data law is really important because a big part of what the students do is a lot of research to collect data so that they can advocate for their policy goal. And really our goal at Generation Citizen is to make sure that all students are receiving action civics so they can be engaged lifelong citizens.
Yeah, hi, I'm Aankit Patel. I work at the Department of Education on the Computer Science for All initiative, which is a 10-year, $81 million public-private partnership to bring computer science to K through 12. And so our main sort of the thing that we work on and do year in and year out is train teachers, in-service teachers that come from, they might be teaching ELA, math, social studies, science, technology, special ed, and we train them on different computer science curriculum. We create a lot of the curriculum and we spend a lot of time thinking about our professional development, one, because it's for all, so it's an equity initiative, meaning we have to find a way to bring this rigorous computer science education to every single school. And so that in New York City means about 1,864 schools, I think. Yeah, a lot of schools. Every school is different. They implement things differently. Every classroom is different. And so we have to be really thoughtful in what we're bringing to those schools. And one of the major points that we did a lot of co-design in sort of figuring out what our framework would be and how we would approach this. And one of the big things that came up over and over again is social justice and making sure that when we teach computer science, we have this, we put it in context. And so we've created this thing called the blueprint, which really the progression ends, the CS learning progression is defined by these perspectives, and it ends with this citizen perspective of understanding computing through the lens of being a good citizen. And so that means thinking about things like open data, but then also thinking about how systems affect our daily lives. Could be algorithms, could be algorithmic bias. I'm going to bring up that we try not to be overly critical and negative about these things and try to let students really form an opinion about it. I could keep going. I should probably stop at this point and let Ramesh introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Ramesh. I was formerly a Civic Innovation Fellow at BetaNYC, and now I do consultant work for Manhattan Community Board 1 at BetaNYC.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the Civic Innovation Fellow program at BetaNYC?
Yeah, so the Civic Innovation program is, they recruit students all across the CUNY campuses across the 5 boroughs, and they place them, they put us first through the first half of the semester, they do kind of a boot camp where they kind of introduce us to all things open data. So from there, we've learned how to look at and form our own data sets, manipulate the data sets, and do some kind of rudimentary analysis, mapping, of things of that sort. So as kind of a crash course into what open data is. And then the second half of the year, the fellows are kind of broken up into groups, and we get to kind of do projects that are, they do the best they can to kind of align our interests into a project that we kind of create together. So, so for instance, on so one of the projects that I worked on was creating web tutorial videos for BoardStat, which is BetaNYC's data visualization tool of 301 data. They've done all sorts of other kind of, I've also done a lot of housing related stuff, which was kind of my interest. Yeah, there's things along that nature, so yeah.
And I'm Ilana Schneider. I'm the special programs manager at BetaNYC, and also I have my own consulting practice that works with nonprofits and local government on helping people work better together, and my background is in community organizing. And I'm working with CS for All with BetaNYC on the Hack League, which I think has been mentioned a couple times today. It's a partnership with the CS for All initiative where we are encouraging middle and high school students to use open data to identify opportunities or problems in their own communities and then design solutions for approaching those problems. We've had we've trained over 100 teachers in New York City to participate. We've had about 65 schools participating around the city. We've reached definitely over 1,500 students, probably more, that have participated this year alone, and the projects are amazing. From students approaching how to handle vaping, to heat and hot water issues in their communities, to deer problems, to blocked driveways, and these are all sort of issues that were identified by the students based on data that they found in their local communities. So it's been a very exciting project around that. So the next question I'd just like to ask the panel quickly is, why do you do this work? There's many things that one could do in the world, and what motivates you to engage in this particular space?
We really have seen that, especially youth are less engaged civically. And at Generation Citizen, we believe one of the root causes is the lack of civic education in schools. And if there is civic education, it's pretty boring, right? Just like rote memorization. Why does this matter to me? Like, I'm in middle school or high school. I don't really care about these topics. And so for us, we really want students to understand that it's important to be civically engaged, and all these decisions do affect you and your community. You know, if you have a parent or a grandparent that's not well, and you're not involved with bills and initiatives that are going on about healthcare, that's something that's going to affect you. If you want to go to school and the price of going to school is high, you're not going to go to school, and so forth. So really building the connection by starting where students are interested, and then having them do the research to figure out, oh, these are the systems that are making these decisions that affect something I actually care about, right? And that can be big or small. So issues range from poor quality of school lunch to sexual harassment and police brutality, right? So the students are deciding what they care about, and really it's our duty, it's to make sure that this is happening in school. So that's really why we believe it's important, and we're doing the work that we're doing.
Very similar reasons. Learning should be active, and it should give students agency. And so people talk about, especially when they talk about computer science, it's like, oh, we need to get all these kids to learn how to code so they can go be software engineers. And like, it really what is important is that they have agency, and they see themselves in their work such that they can go and find whatever it is that should be whatever their calling is, and that just doesn't exist in school in a lot of places. And so CS for All is actually this really interesting opportunity to kind of do school reform in a way by like introducing this completely new subject. Also, I just sort of like hate computer science as like and computers to some extent, and I want kids to be critical of that, so it's something I have to do.
So I'll expand on the theme of agency. Based on my experience, what kind of led me to kind of a civic-oriented work was the kind of lack of agency that I had in my personal experience. Going through, I was raised, undocumented parents, so we kind of inherently learned to kind of live in the shadows, and it's quite easy to get lost in the school system in that way, despite even doing earnestly, performing well. So I was in a predicament where I didn't feel like I had sort of any agency at all, and what, even the concept of college kind of seemed foreign. So despite, earning relatively good grades, and so it was quite difficult for me. I ended up joining the military, where I traded a form of agency, as far as what I would want to do with financial sort of agency, which kind of led me here, where at the program was kind of really opening, because the feeling of now having that ability to kind of really immerse yourself into an issue that you care about. So one of the ones that I kind of did, I did housing because my parents have been housing insecure the whole time, based on partly on their immigration status and partly on other things. So to have, it was kind of therapeutic to have that kind of experience, to kind of be able to really kind of ruminate on all the things that are difficult. It's such a monumental problem. So the ability to take that interest and to actually, it certainly encouraged me to keep going in the program, but also led me to choose kind of this program relative to other programs that I might have chosen in another sphere. So yeah.
Thanks. And I'll just add in that I think a couple points that I heard here, the idea of this work as therapeutic, I think that there's something really powerful about organizing, and what I've heard a lot about today, which is designing with, not for, and that there's something very different about that. It's not that you come in with a solution, it's that you're actually working with people that have direct interest, and maybe it's the people themselves who have direct interest, and open data provides a unique opportunity to actually dive into public information that used to be once proprietary, or very expensive, or inaccessible, that now becomes public in a way. And for me, what's been very exciting about working with BetaNYC in the civic tech space is the idea of reform and government reform. And this seems to be a wonderful avenue for opening up government. And my particular interest in is, how do you open up government for people that aren't often represented in government or participating in government, and getting to work on youth, with the school, with public school students, with our CUNY students, has been amazing. And here's the hypothesis of our panel, which we're going to test out a little bit in the room, which is a couple assumptions. One, civics is important. People understanding how to engage civically is important, and an inherent value in our democracy. For a healthy democracy, you need a healthy citizen and engaged and educated populace. Two, if you give people opportunities early on in life, it will make them more engaged citizens later, whether that's education, whether that's an experience with the civic process. And if we do that, targeting people that aren't typically involved in government, we might have a more diverse government later. So those are some of our 3 assumptions on this panel, I think. And Brooke's going to build on that a little bit.
Okay, so since it's the end of the day and it's hard to focus on a Saturday, right? We're gonna do some movement, and feel free to participate if you'd like, not mandatory, but I'm gonna list a couple questions about your civic engagement, and if you have participated in these civic activities, please stand up, okay? So the first one is, how many people are registered to vote? Okay, I'll stand up too, right, good. How many people, so for the next question, you'll sit down or stand up depending on whether or not you participated. How many people voted in the public advocate race? Yeah. If you didn't, you can sit down. I am very, wow, yes. The 9%, okay, yeah. Excellent. What about the midterm elections in November? All right. How many people have ever attended a community board meeting? Yes. How many people serve on a community board? I'm going to be real with y'all, all right? There's no shame. We're not shaming each other here. How many people have ever attended a neighborhood meeting? Met with their elected official. Actually met, like, you know, or went, no, like went to, in any capacity. Any capacity. We'll keep that, yeah. Attended a rally. Worked on a campaign.
We can do any campaign, an issue campaign or a campaign for political office, campaign for legislative change.
All right, gathered petition signatures.
Political or otherwise.
Signed a petition. Given money to an issue campaign or a candidate. All right, we are a pretty civically engaged bunch in here. That was a thank you for...
Can I just, before you sit down, of those people, who, among those, if you could sort of stay standing, if you, any of these, this is going to be an end statement, if you had a parent who took you to vote with them, if you had a friend who was engaged in politics, if you were engaged, had a meaningful civics experience as youth, if you were engaged in a club or a group or something around that sort of taught you how to engage with civics. So, great.
That's interesting to see because it's not as many folks as I thought there would be, so you've taken some initiative on your own later, which is...
Yeah, which is sort of a question of what makes one start to get civically engaged, which is always a question, obviously, that political scientists are always trying to figure out, but yeah, I think we'll engage with that. So given that, I think I'd be curious if anybody maybe wants, we could maybe start on that a little bit as we sort of start to figure out with youth in particular, this idea of a next generation coming up in a different society than we grew up in. What are those ways to engage youth? What is effective? And sort of for the audience, if anybody had a meaningful experience they want to share that made them think about the need to be civically engaged. Or a question for us along those lines.
Just speaking for myself and then a lot of other people I know who, worked in sort of technology and for-profit businesses or startups and those kinds of things, and were looking for something more fulfilling. I know a lot of people that got into civics that way.
I'm curious how you engage with the nonpartisan/partisan elements when maybe, say, hypothetically, one political party attacks government services or shreds them, and strengthening civics while this is our environment, that it's inherently political, whether you want it to be or not?
Well, I think with Generation Citizen, we really focus on everything being student-led, and we train teachers and administrators who are providing this curriculum to make sure that they are purely being student-led and as difficult as it can be, not leaning or directing students in a certain way. One of the things that we also provide professional development on for our teachers is making sure that the students have media literacy, and so that when they're looking up articles, when they're on Facebook and get different posts, they're researching where is that information coming from, and do they have a vested interest, just so that they can decipher that. I mean, it's really important that we're providing students the tools and the skills to do this on their own, and that's really what our curriculum and organization does, is give them the tools to make those decisions on their own. And it can be challenging for our teachers. We definitely do a lot of coaching and support because many of the topics are personal to the students as well as the teachers.
So yeah, that's a really good question, and it just echo that, like so for example, when we talk about privacy and consent and algorithmic bias with teachers, immediately they're like bringing their own experiences into that. And while that's good and it often is like really important to teaching to like bring that personal excitement, it can be really dangerous to form opinions for kids. They're growing up in this world and they have a very different sort of idea of these things. And so while I think this came up while we were training teachers around on the Hackley, like there were like these political sentiments coming in, and it becomes this balance of something that you obviously should, bring your own passion to teaching, but at the same time really making space for students to build out their own ideas, formulate, and in providing those types of scaffolds is the word that teachers use, like kind of help them get there on their own. It's difficult, and I don't think anybody really does it perfectly.
You still have any questions?
The idea of civic engagement for me is very personal because I grew up for different consecutive governments that were totalitarian governments, first right wing, then left wing, in my childhood. Then came to the United States, and around 14, 15, noticed that here I was in America, where your dreams come true, and I was living in a neighborhood where that type of, like Tammany Hall, third world country was alive and well in the neighborhood. The way people voted, the way people were not informed, and that is what propelled me to not only be civically involved personally, but drag as many people with me, kicking and screaming, pointing out what the potential of the neighborhood was, a neighborhood that is now called an up-and-coming neighborhood, where people are being displaced left and right. I guess I didn't get to as many as I wish I had, so it's been very personal for me. And I don't hear people. I hear people who have had similar experiences as mine because they were raised in other places, and they still kind of don't connect that it's happening to them again. And I'm not sure why they're not engaged, but their children need to be. So I work with a lot of young people, professionally and civically in the neighborhood, participatory budgeting, by any means necessary, getting involved with the repairs in the park, then renovations in the park, designing the new playground, so to get the kids to see that they do have a voice, that they can make a difference.
And thank you for that, Maria. And I think that a lot of what you were speaking about is in the design of both the Hack League and it sounds like in Generation Citizen, which is starting from a place where students are actually engaged and see themselves in the data or in the issue, or there's some connection point. It's not just starting with, let's tell you about the structure of the government and the history of like how a bill becomes law, all that stuff, which for some kids that works really well, right? Some kids are totally down with understanding the structures, but for those that aren't, there needs to be other ways in. And then on top of that, which I think speaks to what EM was asking about in the back, how do you then have a discussion about power with that? Because it's not just about something happening in your community. There's also an underlying power structure that is operating all the time, even if you're not engaged in it, that's going to be going on. And so how do we give students tools to understand that structure and then engage with it and feel that they can participate in it, and also have the tools to participate in an effective way? So it's not just about voting, but it is about actually all these other things. Voting is kind of like the show at the end of the day, but there are many steps, which we kind of asked you about, that are involved in civic engagement. And what does it take to start taking those steps? And how do we get people to do that from a young age? No, there's a...
I guess I wanted to say the reason that I became civically engaged is I realized that there were a lot of old, out-of-touch people making short-sighted decisions that were going to have negative consequences for my generation and future generations. And I realized that like if young people act disinterested and aren't engaged, then we're going to have to deal with those consequences, and it's better to be engaged and try to change the system. I also have a question. For a lot of teachers are underpaid and overworked. How do you incentivize them to engage in these sorts of programs?
We pay them.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's expensive, but yeah, so the union has a negotiated rate that teachers get paid hourly for work outside of school, and it's a good question. A lot of people expect teachers to do all this extra work, and then they don't want to pay it. People on my own team will be like, "No, we're not going to pay them." Like, why not? It does add up, but like, yeah, this work is, I think, important enough, and we ask them to do a lot, so that, you know, we pay them. There's lots of different structures to pay teachers to do more and to like take leadership, and that's kind of a big part of what I've learned being at the DOE is like their teachers need you have to work at professionalizing it and treat them that way, and it makes a huge difference in the way that they like the work that they do and how they approach their classroom. Thank you for asking.
With Generation Citizen, it's during the school day. So what we really do for the teachers is we have a very extensive curriculum, which they can implement during the school day with all PowerPoints created, student handbooks, and so we really try to make it an easy lift for teachers because we know how much they're doing. Participation in government is a mandate for students, and it really doesn't have a curriculum, so many teachers are excited that when they partner with Generation Citizen, they have a curriculum for their civics class. But we provide a lot of support with our teachers. We work with around 80 teachers or so in all 5 boroughs, educate over 5,300 students in New York alone, and we work around their schedule. So sometimes we're having calls at night, sometimes they just want emails, sometimes we go into the classroom. So we really try to provide the support we can and let them know that we really value them, because I go into those middle school classes and I'm like, I appreciate you, this is hard, but and really just making sure that teachers understand how important this is for their students to have this experience and to really be engaged in civics.
I just want to add in that when we were talking beforehand, both Brooke and Aankit had sort of pointed out that the difficulty of adding civics into classrooms when it's not something that's tested on for students. So there's some aspect that it's required, which Brooke told me is called PIG, participation in government. So that's required, but if it's not tested, does it get the same kind of investment or the same kind of interest? And I think, as Aankit was saying, that's this idea of pushing it in through computer science seems to be an avenue that is open in a way that maybe there weren't always opportunities.
Yep. No, my background coming into all this is the same as hers, where a lot of people weren't kind of representing their community or didn't have anything similar, to the community. But my question is there a model to take what you're doing and scale it out to other regions or other cities, smaller cities, perhaps?
So that is sort of ancillary to our way. So there's a larger national CS for All movement that the folks that run it actually started here in New York City and helped get ours off the ground. And so we are looking to kind of package our materials and structures. And so for example, Detroit has been interested in some of our work. And so we're talking to them, or actually this national CS for All consortium is talking to them. A lot of this is just organizing, though, and having, people in city government that kind of know what they're doing, building a team around it, having all this funding. So it's not sort of like I don't know, there's no tech solution to this. There's no, yeah. Sorry, it looks like you're very unfulfilled.
Generation Citizen is a national nonprofit. We actually started in Rhode Island, and we're in Massachusetts. New York is the largest site, the Bay Area in California, Oklahoma, Texas, and then we have remote programming where we have our curriculum and support in areas like Alabama, Jersey, and elsewhere. And we have a department of our organization that's all based on advocacy and how we can really continue to spread.
And I'll add in that BetaNYC, like our name, is always trying to prototype what we're doing and share it with other people. All our material is always open source and available, and we're happy to talk to people in other places that would be interested in replicating programs like this. But I think what Aankit said is really important, that while these are sort of tech curriculums, it's always people-centered, and that the people involved are absolutely essential. And so being on board with the vision of it, the mission of it, and then having the people skills to actually implement, to get the resources together, to pull together the key players, that's a lifelong skill. And that's, I think, what we try to teach in both these curriculums extensively. And it's hard to fund that sometimes. But it's just as important. It's not as sexy, it's not tech, it's not, but it actually is the most important skill to learn. So. That. And I know we have some other questions, but I would like to just also prompt Ramesh a little bit. If you could share a little bit of your experience. You talked to us before about wanting a desire to go into public service, and curious where that came from and how that developed for you.
Initially because my family, because they were kind of excluded from many parts of the political community. So they weren't able to kind of partake into, and not even aware of how much rights they had or whatever. So, and the frustrations that came for their inability to do so. And the people in my community that were generally largely disenfranchised because they didn't see any sort of, government was often a tool of an oppressive tool. And although it can be wielded in the other form, it was very hard for them to see it as a tool for advocacy, to represent their own interests. Certainly, in my case, it was difficult. Even if you did so many things right, you were still kind of felt guilty. Through my eviction time and through the social system, constantly feeling that you've done something wrong by being poor or not having certain advantages. And this is replicated, many times for all the, these disadvantaged groups. And it's hard to see to walk into a courtroom with so many parents and people my age, and it's full. The courtrooms are full, and you're like, it becomes a point where, purely on principle, that something has to be done. It's clearly to the point where even the oppressive tool is unsustainable, to the sense where they can't even replicate it to that, and it's, funneling down further in. It's very, I don't know, it's scary. So those experiences led me to kind of seek some sort of public service, but which kind of led me to the military, but I, it didn't quite capture what I really would have wanted was kind of, like a supportive, not only civic engaged, but yeah, supportive, very, to not kind of, to think empathetically about, to be sensitive to humanity, but not in an abstract or intellectual way, to always keep it human-centered. So I think that was one of the biggest things that I took away from that.
Thanks. I know we had a question in the back. Did you have a question? We need to get. Oh, sorry. Okay, and then we'll get to you next. Sorry.
I guess following up on that, around the idea of having some support for engagement. I work with young people who are interested in engaging, but talk themselves out of it, or just feel like no one's listening. If they say anything, no one's really going to take them seriously. If they say anything, well, it might be logged somewhere in a file that no one ever reads again, and any ideas, get churned over and over. So as much as we're all interested in getting young people civically engaged, what is the environment for that engagement? Is anyone listening? Is anyone inviting young people to be participating? And are they devolving power?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think with Generation Citizen, it's really wonderful because the students create an action plan and they implement it. And so you go into a senior, classroom, a PIG classroom, and students are calling their council member and they're terrified. So you have like these very cool seniors being terrified to make a phone call to their council member. So they are nervous, right? And they don't feel like the system is for them. And they make that phone call, and that already feels empowering. The fact that they can actually call their council member, someone who represents them. But one thing that we are constantly reminding students is that change takes time. And I think that's hard for many students because we're used to instant gratification, we're used to just getting anything we want whenever we want it, and having them realize that you're going to have to call that council member many times. Maybe you're going to just have to show up and make that change or use other tools. We actually had a classroom in Brooklyn that their goal was to get a traffic countdown clock on the intersection because their teacher was actually struck and she's okay, but she wasn't okay for a little while. And so they did all this research, they presented to their council member, they reached out to the Department of Transportation, everyone's like, this is great, this is great, this is great. Nothing happened, and they're like, you know what, we're calling the media in. They called the local news station, they talked about how they met with their council member, a representative of the Department of Transportation, how nothing was being done, and by January, so this ended in November, January they had that countdown clock. So it's also figuring out what are the tools, who are the influencers, how can you make this change, and it's many different ways, right? So giving them exposure to the many different tactics that they can use.
Ilana's been doing a lot of work with our Hack League to bring in subject matter experts, folks that work in nonprofit. There's people in the audience that I think have attended, and elected officials and people that work for the city. And so we've created a space where somebody's listening. But I share that sort of same, how much are they listening? Are they really ready to listen to kids? The interesting thing about using data is that it sort of gives them some instant credibility in a way, and they themselves feel a little bit more confident, which I think to do all the things that Brooke was talking about, you have to have some level of confidence and then persistence, and there's there's clearly a process to do these things, and it won't happen quickly, and so just what I'm hoping is that the Hack League is giving students an environment where they see that going through that process is worthwhile, and that maybe then they're more willing to do that. But yeah, that's a hard problem, and I would maybe if you don't build their confidence in the first place, then they're not going to ever follow through.
Which is why I think it's so important it's done in a classroom and in a safe space where they have colleagues or teachers saying, all right, that council member flaked on us, and this actually happened as well. A council member was supposed to visit a classroom, they flaked last minute, and they went on their Twitter or some social media account, and they called them out, saying, our class was excited to have so-and-so come, and they didn't. So, right, because we work with many council members and assembly members to have them come into the classrooms, and some are really eager and excited and some aren't. But the reality is they're representing a group of people, and so we need to make them accountable, and we need to give students the confidence and the tools to do so, and it's extremely powerful when students recognize that they do have that power.
And I'll just add in two things about Hack League. We've really thought about the spaces where we've been hosting the borough-wide events. So the Manhattan borough-wide competition next Wednesday is going to be in the municipal building. And then the following one in Brooklyn the following week at the Brooklyn Borough Hall. And we're very excited that the final citywide event is going to be inside the City Hall chambers. And so part of the idea is that we're trying to invite students into these civic spaces where they are coming, they're champions from their borough, and they're being listened to and engaged with elected officials, so that maybe the first time when they're working in a campaign, it's not the first time they've met them, or they've been in these spaces and see them hopefully as their own, because they are public spaces, they are the people's spaces, but we don't often, it's very hard to get into them still. So, yeah. A question in the back, or comment?
Covered quite a bit of stuff. I guess I'm one of those old fogies that you spoke about. But what I want to tell you is that even old fogies want to see a change. And quite frankly, the older you get a little tired. We still have a bit of energy, however. And I want to see, particularly in Central Harlem, a whole new crop of young people. We've been under siege by the politicians that are there. And the only people who get promoted through the system, and I say promoted for a reason, are people who they have picked to to run. I want to see a whole bunch of AOCs in Central Harlem, because we're ready. We're ready. And we have to see a change. Now, part of the thing with education, and I'm not going to take a long time, I promise. Part of the thing with education is that I find, for example, a school like Democracy Prep gets a lot of press because they're doing some of the things you're talking about. My mother was taught civics. That was an actual course. So she understood who your senator was, who your council member was, who the president was, who the federal senator was. These kids don't even know. When I engage them in conversation, they have no idea of who's representing them. You know, they're talking about the party and this and that because it's never really taught to them. I don't understand why there's no more civics in school and why there's no regents in it. Because it seems as though, and maybe again, I'm an old lady, it seems as though when there's a regents, people pay attention. I know I did when I had to take. So to me, that should be a regent subject. It should be mandated that civics is taught in the school. We will have a much wiser electorate and we'll have more AOCs all over this country if we can get that kind of involvement. I don't think everybody has to be a democratic socialist to be educated about the government, but I can tell you that was a hell of a line of questioning AOC put out at that Cohen hearing. She took care of business, her staff had her ready, and to me, that's an example of what our young people can do. So even the old fogies want to see some new blood out there. And you should get out there and hang out with some of the old fogies and get some of that history. And then you should get out there and run. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to get in trouble. It's okay. So the reason that civics is probably not being told or taught is testing. We test. So many, and we focused on math and ELA because we're competing against every country in the world to be the best, and we're not. And so we sort of strip everything else out, art, and music, and so I think in a way you're right, like testing civics would bring it back, and maybe that's something that you could advocate for to the New York State Education Department. I'll stop there. But that's like a civic engagement thing that we could work on, I guess. But I don't know if more testing is really the answer. I know we're here to talk about data, and like we haven't talked about school data at all, but like testing is a major piece of data coming out of schools, but it's like, how valid is it? People do a lot of like psychometric work on tests to make sure that, if a student were to take it twice, it would result in the same rough results. They would get the same score, but still, is that really the mechanism that we should be using? Is that really good data? Do we want to measure human intellect that way? I don't know. I think that's potentially dangerous, but it's why we don't teach civics is testing.
So I was told we have 1 minute left on the panel. I know there was like a question that was waiting over here and a couple other questions. So can I just put out a question to you to take with you, and maybe if you could share with somebody on your way out, and I'm sorry I asked the Civic Innovation Fellows to come in and then didn't give them time, which if you would love, these are our Civic Innovation Fellows sitting in the second row here that are currently in our program. If you would want to talk to them about their experience in the fellowship, how it's changed them, made them think about civics, I think they'd welcome the opportunity to share that with you. And if you might want to turn to somebody and share an idea that came from you on the way out, just what this makes you think about or a question you have, just to kind of keep that conversation going, we'd really invite you to do that. And I think we'll take the last question here and then close up.
Yeah, my question kind of gets to a couple of things that Aankit was talking about. I'm curious about how the data fits into these curricula. Where does open data come in? How do you teach problem formulation, like finding issues and using it to support arguments and things like that?
Can I throw that to Ramesh first to talk about how he did that at the Civic Innovation program, then we can kind of go down?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we did was we used 3-in-1 data, and we tried to form a correlation between, say, heat and hot water calls and possible unscrupulous landlord behavior to try to draw a connection there. So we did some light statistical analysis work on things like that. So that's one example of how we would use. But a lot of our work at the Civic Innovation program did center around 3-in-1 data sets. So yeah, I mean, as far as for the Civic Innovation portion of that, yeah, we used a lot of 3-in-1 data for that.
For Generation Citizen, it's just a great way, a great tool and a resource for students as they build their argument to gather support. So.
So most of our computing curriculum is around projects, and so we don't spend a lot of time. We'll teach skills, but it's around building something. So what are we building? Well, let's start with open data. Let's identify it could be a problem. It could just be something interesting we found. It doesn't always have to be a problem. Not everything is problems and solutions. Sometimes we just want to express ourselves. And so try to keep that open, let the student drive as much as possible. So it's sort of probably a different type of pedagogy than most people are used to seeing in classrooms. But that's how we do that. Is there a second question? Or okay. Or, felt like there was.
Okay. Okay, last question, last story.
I'll be quick. I'm wondering who the other players are in this space, maybe other orgs or people who are doing explicitly civic engagement training as it intersects with computer science or thinking about open data. To me, it sounds a little bit like we've got players from closer to one end of the spectrum and the other, but is there anyone who's working to be more in the middle?
What do you mean by one end of the spectrum or the other?
So from where I am, it sounds like Brooke really focuses on the civics training and takes advantage of open data or tech as a tool. Aankit is focused on that computer science pipeline and maybe is starting to bring in ethics or integrates ethics in some way. Is there anyone who is doing civic training explicitly within maybe a computer science space that isn't so tech skill focused? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. The only thing I would say that's also sort of adjacent that's I think worth looking at is AI for all. I don't know exactly how that's funded, but I know that part of it's NSF funded. NSF funds a lot of this work. And they work with universities, and they work directly with students. They have sort of summer institutes where kids get to sort of explore AI and potential biases, and in that I don't know exactly how it works, but it might be more technical than it is. But they do address some of those issues of ethics and data. I don't know what type of data they use though.
I would say that I think the idea is that the Hack League is really trying to sit squarely in that space of using open data, using data with a civics endpoint. So kind of marrying that, and then we're also co-developing a curriculum as well around that, a capstone sort of project for students. So maybe we are going to be occupying that space, but also interested there's other people in it.
Not that I know of, but what's been exciting for me today is thinking about, so Generation Citizen usually sits in a social studies class, although we've been integrated into English classes, an environmental science class, really the administration and teachers choose. And just thinking how about we can be in more computer classes, or really weaving civics into every subject. And I think that events like this present more opportunities for us to explore that and to act on that.
Thank you.
So thank you to everybody in the room, and please keep this conversation going. Talk to somebody, talk to our Civic Innovation Fellows, talk to somebody, we'll be around for a little while, about your civic engagement experience, what caused you to do it, what makes you keep doing it, and some ways that you might want to be involved. And thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to Data and Society for streaming. Thank you to our volunteers.